If that's
Well,
good,
let's
then we're
kick it
good.
off today, folks. Sorry for the delayed start. We're here with a very good friend of mine, Aaron Apple. We are here with a truncated version of the ETF think tank. We have 60% of the ETF think tank here. But I do think today is going to be a very interesting show and a little bit different from what you've heard from us traditionally. Aaron has less experience directly in the public markets, but I think is a prime example of, quite frankly, as a portfolio manager myself of the SoFi Gig Economy ETF, one of the premier shining examples of the gig economy working well for an operator and using the tools to their best purposes most optimally. So first we'll go around and introduce ourselves, and then Aaron will introduce himself last, and then we'll jump in directly with questions. So I'm going to kick it off to Cynthia Murphy.
Hey guys, I am Cynthia Murphy. I'm head of research for the ETF think tank. And as you all know, I love the Thursday show. So thanks for joining us today. Dan?
I'm Dan Weiskopf, the ETF professor. I'm a big believer in Zoom, just still trying to learn about it. Also co-portfolio manager of Block, the blockchain ETF. And I'm really looking forward to Aaron telling us about what you do. The gig economy, I think, is just frankly wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'll go ahead. So my name is Aaron Apple. I kind of most notably for what's going on here, David and I have known each other for a long time, but I started my career at JP Morgan, spent a couple years in investment banking, then went over to private equity, spent a couple years investing in, kind of small growing services businesses, from consumer to financial to just kind of pure play SaaS software. And then about 7.5 years ago, along with a good friend of mine, and now kind of like lifelong business partner, we started a business called Impressive Products. We had seen that there were a lot of people who were starting, consumer product businesses that were focused almost exclusively on Amazon as their distribution channel. And we kind of decided that that was an interesting business model. Got in there kind of very beginning of 2015. And we started building a business that was kind of interestingly a bit different than a lot of the businesses people were building at the time. Most of the people were really focused on building a brand, trying to get people to kind of know what their business was. We kind of took a very different approach, which is we said, hey, let's just be the Kirkland of all the random things we can find, all these very, niche-y product opportunities, but ones that still have a really good volume. Because I don't really think most people care that who they're buying from when it comes to Amazon. They want to see positive signals, they want to see good reviews, they want to see good imagery, well-written listings, make sure that they think the product's going to work for them. But beyond that, they're not really caring that they're buying from a brand. If they can find something that's cheaper or better rated or just overall seems to be a better customer experience, they're happy to do that. So,
and Aaron, I'm going to pause you for a second there and say to relate it to the public equity market, I would relate it most to kind of like, quite frankly, ironically, in today's market, a deep value play, right? With low marketing spend, a sleepy category, not infinite customers, not well capitalized or not well operated industries that might be forgotten, kind of hitting doubles, singles, and the occasional triples. Which I think is very, very relevant to today. And Aaron, before you go a little bit further, I do want to say, so today's drinking word is going to be margins. So every time we say margins, please join us and have a drink with us. And we're going to be talking about optimal margins on all types of weird things and different categories in the market. And we'll go further on to some real estate talk later on.
Sure.
But Aaron, if you could continue in a little bit further.
Absolutely.
Talk about,
so we kind of built up this business, and really what we turned it into was, and to be clear, my business partner and I had never sourced a product, whether from China or the US, and our business ended up doing about 70% of our manufacturing in China, about 30% in the US. Plenty of great reasons to manufacture in the US, plenty of great reasons to manufacture in China, plenty of great reasons to manufacture elsewhere, but China's certainly the easiest way to manufacture. And we just kind of built each piece of the business, brick by brick, mostly from kind of whole cloth, using whatever we could in terms of, some little tools that were out there to give us some pieces of data, but really building our system ourselves, building our logistics and operations side ourselves, building our new product research and development side of things ourselves. We scaled up to about 15 employees, distributed around the globe, around $40 million a year in sales. And then just over a year ago, we sold to an aggregator, over the kind of 2 or so years preceding, us selling something like 10, 12, I think it's now something like $15 billion of equity and debt capital had been raised to go try to roll up businesses in our industry, kind of Amazon focused e-commerce businesses. And so, the getting looked good to get out, and we got out.
Yeah, and actually to tie that to the public market, we've all seen what the last 12 months have done in the e-commerce space, especially with the insane growth expectations. And it is interesting to see that this did follow through to the private market equally as it was in the public market. It was at best kind of like a flat type of e-commerce year, and it just shows you kind of where expectations were.
It was really interesting. I mean, when COVID hit, so, I mean, some of us kind of saw it coming for a little bit. I think my wife and I actually saw it coming for completely different reasons. Me, because we had, employees in China, and they were like, hey, we're locking down. I'm like, well, that's not just going to be China. I'm like, that's clearly coming here. My wife actually, because she used to work for an infectious disease research company. And so we both, for our own reasons, were like, this seems bad in kind of early to mid February, and kind of stocked our house and got things ready. So I knew, some things were coming, but obviously, and I knew it would last a while, but obviously the magnitude of it, dwarfed, almost everyone's expectations. But, when COVID kind of first hit, there was a time where we were like, oh, maybe our business is going to go away because of, logistics and supply chain, and particularly Amazon. We were like, how is Amazon going to deal with this from a warehouse perspective? Everything that everything that someone like us is sending to a customer comes from Amazon's warehouses. And if Amazon's warehouses are having COVID cases, like, how are they going to do that? And so there was a while where we couldn't send new product in. There was a while where, shipment times were up to 21 days. You'd have some times where products would be toggling in and out of that 21 days. So one day it would be 3 or 4 days. The next day it could be 21 days. And you'd see conversion rates just kind of going all over the place because of that, advertising costs going all over the place because of that. But then, after about 2 months of that kind of uncertainty, our business was up 120% year over year. Now that was very bifurcated, right? So we had products that were down 90%, products that you might use in like an office space, for example, just like a corporate office space that you might not use at home, right? Like we had these, these flip pads that you would only use if you were at a conference. Nobody's using those because nobody's having conferences, right? So those went way down. And then you had things like health and fitness stuff that went up by 10x. And so it was insane because you had to, if you had 150 days of inventory, all of a sudden that inventory could be 15 days of inventory. So you're raising prices, dialing back ads, trying to, make things work, trying to figure out how to get supply as quickly as possible. But then you're also managing this global supply chain, which just became really, really complicated. And so
why don't you tell us your number one selling product in 2020, and then I think Dan Weiskopf has a question. So
yeah, I mean, our number one selling product has been for a long time, and it was one of those, I think you alluded to it a little bit. Our business was built on the backs of singles and doubles, and then some of those turned to triples and home runs. But by far our best home run was a descaling solution mainly for home coffee equipment. So if you have a Keurig or you have another single use kind of pod-based system, water running through it has calcium, hard, and minerals, and every so often they kind of build up to a level where you need to descale it. And so we came out with, Keurig was selling a descaling solution, and we were like, God, that seems like they're making good money. Sure enough, they were making really, really good money. We introduced a competitive product, and God, that now sells somewhere between 1.5 million and 2 million bottles of that a year on Amazon. So that ended up becoming by far and away our biggest product. But yeah, that product worked out really well. But we launched a couple other descaling solutions, all sorts of other specialty cleaning chemicals. But sorry, was there a question?
So as an entrepreneur, dealing with so many different products, right? How do you know when you've got it right in the beginning, and when do you know that you're going down the wrong path? Because
totally.
candidly, that's usually my biggest mistake in just being stubborn.
Yeah.
And what was
absolutely.
your
So
success rate on that? Like on a percent
our success rate, I mean, our success rate was really good. Now we had a low bar for what meant success, right? So we looked, despite the fact that, everyone focuses on margins. Take a drink. Our primary, focus, and a lot of this came from me being someone who came from a private equity background, was return on capital, right? So every dollar I invest in inventory, how many dollars am I getting back? And we were looking for that to be really strong. And our business had like an insane return on capital. I think we were something like 2.5 times per year, maybe even more than that, 3 times per year, dollar for dollar kind of return on capital. So, one of the beauties of selling on Amazon, beauties of selling anywhere online, is you get a lot of feedback, right? And so you launch a product, it's usually something like 100 to 1 for sales to reviews. And so it would take a little bit of time to get a review, but very often you'd get feedback right away. Is this product good? Is this product bad? Plenty of times. I mean, when I talk about an 85 to kind of 90% hit rate, I mean, that's products we kept alive. Now, lots of those were singles, right? But they were making enough money, and they took such a low amount of overhead once they were created and launched, that just made sense to keep them running in kind of maintenance mode. So one piece was that feedback. The second was sales volume. And so, you'd see some of them that would kind of take off right off the bat because there were maybe 1 or 2 competitors and you really nailed the product market fit. And then some of them would take 6, 9, 12 months to really pop. The other thing is if you just kind of left them running, every so often there would be some weird market dislocation. Where you're like, oh, it turns out I'm the only person holding stock on this product that people need to buy anymore, right? Like the stores of whoever was, selling it, or maybe they had some supply chain problem that you didn't run into. And so with Amazon and with kind of anything e-commerce, and, especially now, staying in stock is the single most important thing you can do, right? If you bring a customer to your page and you're, low on or out of stock, or you have to raise prices a lot to try to stay in stock, you just really hurt your conversion rate. That hurts all your metrics on Amazon. It's kind of the same thing with any sort of digital advertising, where anybody who's got a digital advertising platform or an e-commerce platform, they want to see conversions. They want to see the customers that are coming to your page are going to end up buying something. And if they don't, you get punished for it. And if they do, you get rewarded. And so for us, it was always a stay in stock at pretty much all costs sort of thing. And so that really ended up becoming the kind of biggest focus of the business, and especially during COVID, was just trying to stay in stock on something.
We got a line of hand raises here, lots of questions. So I'm going to pause you here for a second.
Sure.
I know you could just you're so passionate about this. We could just kind of keep going forever. So I apologize. I'm going to cut you off from now time to time so we can get some very specific questions in.
Yeah, for sure.
And thank you again. This is super, super interesting. Cynthia, take the floor.
So I actually have 2 questions, which we really frown upon, but I don't want to forget them. So one is about supply chain and one is about value chain.
Yeah.
So the supply chain, your entire business was basically idea to delivery to consumer. So you have this incredible insight onto every piece of the supply chain story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So COVID was obviously a crazy curveball, but what have you learned about what are the most fragile points in our supply chain today, or the most resilient pieces that can really bounce back quickly? What's really stood out to you in this COVID experience about the state of the supply chain globally?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is no surprise, but the thing that's the most fragile is the port. Getting it onto a boat in China, other than selective times of year, namely Chinese New Year, is trivial. I mean, booking, it's as long as you're willing to, as long as the economics make sense for whatever the container prices are at the time, very easy to book, a container. There were a few times where it was actually hard to get a container on a boat, but for the vast majority of COVID, getting a container on a boat is not a problem. It's when you arrive into the US, or your ship is sitting there waiting to dock and there's some port issue going on, that's where we saw the biggest slippage in lead times. Was container ships would be sitting there for 15 or 20 days, or they'd be at the port and the container would be unloaded, but no trucker could come there to pick it up because there was just massive port congestion. Once you got it to your warehouse, the warehouse you were using, the 3PL you were using, getting that to Amazon, then to the end customer, again, not that bad. You saw some of that go up in terms of lead time during COVID. but it wasn't that bad. It was really that port, kind of the US port side, that really became the biggest X factor. We were like, oh my God, okay, now we need to add 20 days or 30 days because we have uncertainty around the ports. So that was, I think, yeah.
What was that? Is that primarily because of just pure staffing issues, or is there a lack of technology infrastructure that could improve things that we haven't invested in?
Yeah, so certainly I'm not the greatest expert on this. Actually, the person who I've heard speak most eloquently is the CEO of Flexport, Ryan Peterson. If you listen to the All In podcast he did on the state of the supply chain, he broke that down really, really well. So I would kind of point you there to get like a really complete understanding, but it's both. So our ports are just not technologically advanced like they are in a lot of places. In a lot of places, there's almost no humans. I mean, particularly in China and I think Amsterdam, there's almost no humans involved in what's going on. There's people overseeing things, but they're not actually doing the work. In the US, it's people doing the work. And there are labor shortages. There's, a complex labor relations set of issues there.
Unions, right? It's unions,
yeah, unions
in a world where like a lot of industries and people
Mhm.
believe rightfully so are moving towards unions for the right of the workers from a wage
Yep.
perspective. But margin destruction and future growth destruction is all possible because of that. So
Yeah, and just kind of antiquated. I mean, like, I think that the things that often make the least sense in society are the things that have been around for the longest, where you've seen incrementalist approaches to things rather than like, okay, what if we just started from scratch? Like, how would we design the system? And I think the ports are a perfect example about that. People used to unload ships by hand. There were no containers. Then there were containers. People weren't unloading ships by hand anymore. They were unloading containers by hand. And then it's like now containers come in, they get put on a truck, on a chassis, and then they drive off. And so there's all these things that have kind of happened along the way where if you just stopped now and redesigned it, it would look almost nothing like it looks right now.
And from a gig economy perspective, we're still throw away from that being like a driverless truck, right? Like the whole thing for a long portion of the sequence, maybe not the last mile. So I'm going to pause on my comments, say margins, and then pass it back to Dan Weisskopf for the next question.
Cynthia, you still have your hand up, by the way.
Yeah, because I have another question, but I'll let you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. You'll go after me. Write it down, your question. And this may be a little bit off subject, but
okay.
when I'm talking to the management team of Overstock, they're very focused on the average price.
Mhm.
And you may not come across them very often because they're more on the furniture side.
Mhm, mhm.
But if you have any insights on what they do, I'd love it actually, because they're very focused on high turn, price point,
Mhm.
and knowing their consumer, right?
Totally. Yeah.
That's my question.
So it is a very different business. I mean, Overstock and Wayfair, they're very different businesses because they're selling such, like, if you can get someone, because you're looking at a consumer who comes and says, I want to buy a rug, right? And so if you can get them to buy the $300 or $400 rug instead of the $100 rug, like, you make a lot more money. You make a lot more referral fees. I mean, most basically fees are earned in e-commerce in kind of three ways. The first two have always been the way they earned, which was one was referral fee, which is just, hey, somebody buys something for $100. What percentage of that $100 do we take as the e-commerce platform just for the privilege of you getting to sell on their platform? The second was fulfillment fees. And now when it's something like Overstock or Wayfair, most of the fulfillment is being done not by the platform, whereas on Amazon, something like, well, God, I don't even know, a lot, like the very large bulk of what they're doing is being shipped from and delivered by Amazon. So they're happier to sell more things. Like Amazon doesn't care as much. I mean, I'm sure they care. They want people to spend more money, but they don't care as much about the price point because they know they're going to fulfill it, and they're making money on the fulfillment fee as well. For Overstock, they're like, well, God, we're pretty much only making that referral fee. And so if we can get someone to buy a $300 rug instead of a $100 rug, we earn 3 times the money. Amazon is also making referral fees, but I think they care a little bit less about that. They're just like, just buy everything from Amazon. For us, we actually didn't care about price point at all. I mean, we had products that we sold profitably at $5.99. And then we had products that we sold for $100. And you know, the $100 sale wasn't necessarily that much better because there were fewer of them. And we could sell like 80 units a day at $5.99 and make 2.5 times our money on each sale. So for us, we're just like, we were price point agnostic. And when we started out, we're like, oh, it's got to be between like $15 and $30. But we very quickly were like, well, that's just like a good place to look. But there's all sorts of stuff all up and down the price scale that you're like, well, if I can sell one thing for $5,000 one time, you know, like every week, I'm happy to do that. But it's maybe just as valuable as something that I sell for $5.99, but I sell 80 units a day.
Let's go to Cynthia for another question, and then we'll transition and talk a little bit more about like what's evolved in this market in the last 12 months. So.
Yeah. So let's continue on this train of thought, just the idea of the value chain, right? So I guess you're not concerned with the price, you're concerned with the margin, I guess, to toast your presence today. But
and even more specifically, the kind of the basically ROIC of what you're selling, right? Because ROIC is the thing that drives business growth. If you can't earn a good return on your cash, there's no way your business will thrive.
So what I think is interesting, like when we were talking before the call, you were talking about not just creating the Kirkland of several products, but also creating a better customer experience in terms of whether the value, the actual value proposition isn't just on a cheaper price tag. So in the ETF space, we see this a lot where a lot of new issuers think if they just bring to market something that is just like it, but cheaper, people will flock to it. And that is not always the case. So in your experience, what stands out to you, or have you learned about how people actually value the things they're buying beyond price? Price is just
absolutely.
Tag.
Yeah, I mean, you see it when you see star ratings of things on Amazon. I mean, we would dig in sometimes to products and we would say, listen, this product is totally fine, but the instructions are miswritten, right? So somebody gets this thing and they don't understand how to use it. And then some people, for whatever reason, they're smart enough, or, you know, it just hit them the right way to figure out how to use it. Then some people are like, I'm just flummoxed by this thing. And so one of the things we would always do whenever we sold a product that had to be installed is we would watch installation videos and we'd be like, how are people going to get confused doing this? And how can we break these steps down to be really simple so that anyone can understand it? Or how can we break down like a fit guide to make it so that anybody could understand it? Because we sold a bunch of replacement parts and people don't read that much. So sometimes you'd have to put in the first sentence, this does not fit these things. It fits these things. And then you're like, okay, now that you've read that, let me tell you about why it's a great value. It's a great quality. You're going to love it. It's going to be perfect. But sometimes you have to kind of scream to people, this is for you or this is not for you. Because you pretty much just have to assume that you have a very, very small amount of someone's attention span. And I think that's pretty useful in everything you do, is like when you present something to somebody, and this was what we were always looking for with our products, is like, you should know very quickly, is this for me or not? And because of that, we had insane conversion rates. I think across our products, the last kind of time I looked before we sold the business, we had something like a 35 to 40% conversion rate. So if somebody clicked on our product, there was a 35 to 40% chance they were going to buy our product. I think on Amazon, it probably is somewhere like 8 to 10% on average, but we just got really good at making really compelling products, like a compelling image and compelling language to make it so that, like, if you're seeing the product, like you're going to know very quickly, is this for me or is this not for me?
You also, Aaron, you also became a little bit of a middle market, almost like wholesaler in some of these categories. So I'd love for you to briefly comment on that. And then let's transition a little bit to more like what has happened in the last 12 months in e-commerce.
Yeah,
how has it changed? What does it mean for the different platforms that we're seeing?
Yeah, I'll touch on that first point really quickly. Is we ended up wholesaling to a bunch of different people, some of whom were like us, some of whom were just, running whatever business they were. One of the things we found is that, a lot of people are not very good at sourcing. Sourcing in China is definitely an art. There's some science to it, but a lot of it relies on having good on the ground people.
Relationships. You have the right consultants
It's relationships, but it's also knowing how to read the signs that you're seeing, right? So reading the interactions going back and forth, seeing how long things take, seeing what people are receptive to. There's a lot of kind of decoding that information to say, like, my gut is giving me a good feeling about this manufacturer, or my gut is giving me a bad thing about this manufacturer, right? So there are things you can see. You can send quality control people. You can do like factory audits and things like that. But ultimately, like, that doesn't really matter if it's a great factory, but you put it in an order and they're 40 days late on your order, right? You need them to do a good job, produce high quality product and be on time. And so, you'd go through this kind of process with a factory and, hoping you're seeing good signs, but along the way, if you're seeing any kind of red flags, you're just like, okay, we're out, we're going to find a new factory. It's not worth it. I don't care if they're going to give us the cheapest price. Again, if things are late, if we don't hear from them for 3 days, if we're having a hard time getting status updates, it's just not worth it.
I would imagine the drop in sales going from like number 1 to number 2 in the category in star ranking is just like really painful, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And you're totally right. Like if you have a product that's going really well and then you get a bad batch of product that was, poorly quality controlled, you could destroy something that had been great for a year, could all of a sudden tail off, and then there's kind of no coming back from that, and it could be really
so 12 months later, we're here now. E-commerce, as we mentioned, in the public market is flat to down on a 12-month basis. We have issues with there's more marketing dollars being spent now more than ever, right? And the marketing dollar growth is surpassing the actual revenue growth. And marketing dollars are less efficient, right? A lot of the FANG platforms out there, mega cap tech companies out.
Can I just to put in context, what do you mean by e-commerce is down? Like in relative to physical retail, or what statistic are we talking about?
Overall, I think most sellers are flat.
Yeah.
Most sellers on Amazon are flat to a little bit down. Now that is a really, you see a lot of winners and losers there. So I know a bunch of people who still sell on Amazon. I kind of know something about how some of these businesses are doing. You saw a lot of people who had this amazing COVID bump, and then they had a total reversion back to their means. So their business might have doubled, but then the year after it went back to the same place it was. They had a kind of a one-time bump. So, people selling fitness accessories and things like that, they saw this one-time explosion, and then turns out that, there's only so many resistance bands that people can buy. Like once you have resistance bands, you don't need resistance bands again. I think what a lot of people have talked about with some of the growth was, some people saw it as, oh, okay, we've changed the trajectory of the line. What other people saw, which is I think what really happened, is no, you actually just pushed the line's growth like up. So it's still growing at the same rate, but you just basically went up like this and then back to the normal, right? Which is like, makes a lot of sense, right? You had a bunch of people who all of a sudden had to figure out how to buy stuff online, but it's not like there's infinite people who aren't spending that much money online. There's a discrete number of those people, and like you just accelerated that, but then that growth is kind of going back to the same level. And then you're seeing other people going back to shopping in person. I spent a year. I don't think I shopped in person like once, and I've been to a store probably every week for the last 3 or 4 months as a lot of the COVID stuff is kind of eased up.
Let's transition this to the marketing side, right?
Yeah, the marketing side is really interesting. It's really interesting.
The increased spending in marketing.
Yeah,
and
so exactly. Yeah. So on Amazon, which I know the best, right? In 2015, so when we started doing our working on our business on Amazon, very few people were advertising. We kind of were like, oh, we need to advertise. It's an opportunity on Amazon to take some of these sponsored product slots. But very few people were advertising, and the return on investment on advertising was insane because not that many people were doing it. You could take a product that wasn't organically ranking at all and all of a sudden jump to the first slot because nobody else was trying to advertise. And so it was really easy to get that exposure, and it was really, really cheap because it's—
Sorry, could you say that again?
Siri, be quiet. It was, it's
always listening.
Always listening. It's a bidding algorithm, right? So if somebody's willing to pay 75 cents and somebody else is willing to pay 50 cents, then you basically pay 51 cents or something like that. It's not exactly that obvious, but it's more or less like a second price auction. Now if you're competing with 10 people and they all know that they have to advertise, you may be willing to pay $3 and somebody may be willing to pay $2.75. And all of a sudden you're paying $2.75 for that same slot that cost you 51 cents, years ago. So the numbers are, this is really stark. So in 2015, Amazon's advertising business. Now their advertising business isn't all from sellers, but a lot of it is. their advertising business was $1 billion business. In 2021, that advertising business was a $31 billion business.
Wow.
Over that, so 31x in their advertising revenue, 4x in their gross merchandise value, right? So people are selling 4 times the amount of stuff and paying 31 times the amount to advertise. Now, tons of stuff gets sold without advertising, right? There's tons of categories where still there's very, very little advertising. And when you're seeing out the categories where there's a lot of people, where there's a lot of people trying to compete, it's insane. I mean, you could be paying $4 or $5 a click easily to sell some of the stuff, and you have to have the conversion rates to back it up. That is pretty much a pure extraction of value from sellers to Amazon. You know, it's not like having more things advertised means people are going to buy more. People are buying pretty much the same thing, whether they're buying the thing that's organically ranked or whether the thing that's advertised to be there. It's really just a pure extraction of value. And so when you look at, you know, some of the hot water Amazon got in over, you know, launching their own products and things like that, I think one of the things they've said is, all right, well, I don't care if we launch our own products. Like, we don't need to launch our own products. You know what's way better than launching our own products? Like, people having to pay us more to sell their products. And it is now
fighting for the top of their list,
fighting for the
of
top
same
slot.
products, right?
Exactly,
Like
right.
walking away
You know, those margins are way better than selling products, right? I mean, if you're selling a product, you know, 30, 40, oh, sorry, I keep saying margins. 40% gross is, you know, good. It's pretty healthy.
If you
to
can
relate this,
sell, sorry, David, go ahead.
no, go for it.
No, I was going to ask, so if in your experience, you can sell relatively equally successful, putting a ton of money into advertising or not in Amazon, because the way we shop on Amazon, a lot of it is just, it's a keyword.
You have to pay. You have to pay to get exposure. Otherwise,
Today you do.
Today you do, because the other thing is Amazon has a huge, like, search engine, right? I mean, Amazon is basically a search engine that's constantly deciding.
Well, hold on. Let me set this up before you go there, just to frame this and make this a little more contextual for the broader equity market. Like, one of the things we've been discussing at Taroso is like, and a lot of people have, right, data privacy, right? And what does that actually physically mean? It means that if you are a part of a sale to an end client that passes through a number of different companies, the data that passed between companies is now on pause. They have no idea what they're really supposed to do about it. So the only ones who can efficiently use that data from A to Z are the ones that have you on their ecosystem A to Z.
Exactly.
Which in this world is Amazon and Google, right?
Yeah. It's everything. Everything.
Apple. Do you consider Apple in that as well with the Apple Store, or no? Is that totally different? That's different. That's not the same thing.
In a lot of ways, it's similar. I mean, at least as far as app related stuff goes, people are coming in, you know, they're going to the App Store, although kind of yes, kind of no, right? Because a lot of people are getting to the App Store from other places. Amazon kind of knows what's bringing them in. I mean, they can see the product they're coming to see. And, you know, with Amazon, a lot of, like, the vast majority of their searching is not coming from Google, it's coming from Amazon. It's people searching for things on Amazon, then looking to buy. With the App Store, hard to say. I think a lot of people would probably start elsewhere and end up at the App Store, realizing, you know, start on whoever designed the app's website or whatever podcast told you about the app, and then you end up. So it's probably a little bit more complex for them, because they may not be as aware of the sources of, like, where that's coming from, although that might be easier to pinpoint just because it's like one source. But for Amazon, everything's happening on Amazon. So they've got, like, complete customer data. They know everything you've ever bought on their platform. They know how much you've searched, what you've looked for, all those things. Like, they own all that data, and it's just so much more powerful. I mean, they can, you know, now they have Whole Foods, right? So they know all the groceries you're buying, like everything you're buying at Whole Foods. And so, yeah, I think they own their data in a way that a lot of other companies are just not necessarily anymore. Sorry, what were we talking about?
No, I think that's a good point. Cynthia or Dan, do you guys have more questions on this specifically, or else I want to transition, pivot this a little bit, but I'll pause and see if you guys want to hop in on this.
No,
topic.
I guess just to conclude that this customer information data conversation is, it looks like there's been a change, or we're moving towards trying again to protect the concept of privacy, even though I think it no longer exists. So does that just mean these guys are going to be in this super powerful prime position because now that they have it, you can't take it away? but other people won't be able to build that kind of information. So it gives them this continuous competitive advantage. Or do you think it's, there's any chance of them losing some of all this insight?
I mean, I think when it comes to Amazon, like they have the most data, they will always have the most data. Nobody else will understand it like they understand it.
There will be third-party solutions that connect this in a way that governments from a legal perspective allow to happen.
Sure,
Like
sure. And the reality is
point,
Amazon actually shares a lot of this data. I mean, when you're a seller, the level of insight you could get from when we started selling to now is crazy. I mean, Amazon gives back to sellers a lot of the data they're collecting, like what all the search terms people are using to see you, like how you're ranking on the search terms, how you used to be ranking on the search terms, all those things. Because people were building third-party tools, and Amazon's like, we might as well build those third-party tools because all they want you to do is spend more money on advertising. Like they want you to put more of your catalog on Amazon. They want you to advertise more of your catalog. And so they're now they're starting to realize, I think they're happy to show that data to anybody, because the ultimate thing is like, they just want you to be like, oh, okay, we're, appearing in this rank for this term, we better spend more money on it. Like that's what they want. So I think that like when I was saying before a little bit about Amazon realizing that like they should just grow their advertising business instead of growing their their products business. They're just like,
click through to Amazon, you mean?
There's no competition for that. Yeah, for Amazon, right? It's way more, way more money. Building a massive, they were never going to take, 100 billion of that, $600 billion gross merchandise value. It would be crazy. I mean, the long tail of products that make up all of that is insane. I mean, there's, millions and millions and millions of SKUs on Amazon. There's 100,000 SKUs that do well. Trying to build a complete products business that does all 100,000 of those SKUs that do well is crazy. I mean, it's a really intense endeavor. That's what people like us were doing, and we were doing it, 50, 60 SKUs at a time in an ideal world. But it turns out that if you just grow that advertising business and just turn it into like much stronger advertising product driven revenue sort of thing, then you don't have to worry about launching your own products. You're just charging people more for the privilege of getting to sell it.
Yep. So to take a transition here, we're going to talk a little bit more granularly on portfolio allocation and philosophical types of investments that we've looked at over the last couple of years and still see some value in, and some details of what we like in that space. And again, as always, we haven't mentioned that enough on this call, but if anyone has any questions for Aaron or anyone else here, please put it in the chat or raise your hand and we can get you guys in. So Aaron, why don't we talk about some aspects of private real estate that we've been investing in?
Yeah, I think both of us are huge fans of private real estate, like private placement real estate deals. A lot of that comes from the fact that they're very well tax advantaged. Whether or not some of those tax advantages should be there is a separate question. I always say that, I try to be, no offense to anyone's politics, but I try to be a good liberal by taking advantage of the things that are there for me and then voting against my own interests. But certainly there's a lot of tax
fantastic quote.
So there's a lot of tax advantages to it, right? The kind of depreciation shielding on any income that comes in, not to mention the losses that get generated from when people go and acquire these buildings or whatever they're acquiring, can have huge benefits, because obviously a tax savings now is worth however your tax rate times the dollar, and that's really, really valuable versus making more money later. I also think that when you get to a certain point, giving up that liquidity, right? So all these deals have you basically give up liquidity in return for what you hope to be, and what often is an incremental return over what you think the markets are going to do. I think, giving up some amount of liquidity makes a lot of sense. Like if you don't need the money that you're investing, which, most people, you want to invest on a long time horizon. If you're investing on a long time horizon, who cares about liquidity in the interim? If there's something that might happen, you need to be careful about how much you invest, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And then the last thing is just to double down that tax kind of angle of it is the 1031 exchange is like an extremely powerful piece of our tax code, right? So when a building, let's say, somebody goes and buys a building and they sell it for, they bought it for $1, they sell it for $2, getting to roll that $2 into your next deal instead of paying gains on it when it exited, just allows you to compound money for so much longer.
In reality, it truthfully is that you actually have the government on the cap table as a passive investor who can't vote and doesn't take distributions or preference. But what are you looking for from an asset class? Like, what kind of things are you looking for? Let's talk more like granularly, like what makes sense in this world. Because look, real estate across the country has gone up. I think everyone can look at the local Zillow and be like, everything in my neighborhood, no matter what, even if you're not in a prime city like Chicago or like New York or Miami or something like that, or LA.
Totally.
What are you
I think there's reasons to invest in all of those places if you get it at a good price. I think you want to make sure you're investing in an asset class that like you're still getting a reasonably good deal on. And so what I look for is I look for operators who have been doing it for a long time, who have a good track record, who understand their market. I don't care if their market is, a first tier city or a third tier city. I think you see the good operators have diligence on the price they go in at. So, and I think to be clear, I like kind of the second and third tier cities that have good tailwinds to them a lot better than I like first tier cities. But there's great reasons to invest in some of the like New Yorks and LAs if you can get the right deal, but you have to get the right deal. Right. You don't want to be just the top of the market, like last person who decided that this was a good idea and bid something. So you're looking generally for people who are getting things more off market, people who are like, we have a relationship, we just do all the deals, we're the next people to buy this thing from these people. We've been doing it for a long time. It works. But I like multifamily by far the most, good high occupancy multifamily in places where there's like good job growth, good economic growth, people moving to those areas. For me, increasingly, it depends on the deal. So if it's a short hold, I don't care about it as much. When you look at longer holds, I'm also thinking climate change on some of the stuff, because I do think that there are markets where there is going to be like a sudden reset when something happens. So for example,
and Aaron, we're going to wrap this up in about a minute or two.
Sure.
But actually, I think the climate report thing could be helpful for people. And I'm just going to hop in and say, like, more granularly, what we've looked for is the $175 to $190 price per square foot in a growing city that has expectations of continuing to grow with Class A operators. But like, do you want to tie that to current markets a little bit more? Talk about like what's going on in the real interest rates or anything like that, or do you not want to participate on that?
Well, I mean, with the interest rate stuff, sometimes you can, depending on how the debt facility is, I mean, you could also be buying a really cheap interest rate loan, right? I mean, a lot of those deals come with a debt facility that, may be a capped, floating or fixed interest rate where you're just like, I'm making this deal now. I think interest rates are going to go up. The next person who tries to buy something, like there's no way, and we're holding them for a long enough time that we think like the market will cycle, but we're like, okay, we're going to have this really cheap debt. We should be making good money on this for a longer time. And then we'll sell it next time interest rates are really low again. So I don't know. I mean, I try to do as much as I can with a kind of a long-term view on everything I do and try not to get rattled by the short term. It can be hard when you see a lot of red in the screen, but that's the other thing about doing all these private deals is I see a lot less red in the screen because there's no screen to see. You get an update, 4 times a year and a K1 at the end of the year, and you just don't have to worry about it as much.
Well, I think
before we wrap, I just really wanted to finish a thought. Because you didn't quite finish the whole climate change impact on the real estate opportunity.
Yeah, that's what I meant to go back to.
Connecting that data.
Yeah, so I have read and digested like as much as my non-scientific brain could of the latest climate change report. And it's really dire. I mean, I think that people in general do not, people are aware, but they haven't really realized that the consequences of what climate change is going to do over the next 20, 30, the rest of our life, the rest of anyone's life. But it's pretty dire. It's quite bad. And I think there's cities like, as much as I love it, New Orleans is a perfect example. Like on a 50-year timescale, I don't think really anybody's living in New Orleans. I think it's going to be more or less subsumed by the ocean. The largest hurricane ever will come, and eventually people will say it's time to stop rebuilding. Similarly, I think that there's a lot of places in Texas and Arizona where it's going to be so hot, like, because one of the things that is the most scary about climate change is it's not just about average temperature, right? It's about extremes. And so the more time goes on, the more extreme events, things that you never expected, right? So Texas, Arizona, there's going to be a day where the power grid fails, and it's going to be 125 degrees and everybody's air conditioning is going to go out and 10,000 people are going to die, right? I mean, it's going to happen. It's pretty much not an if, it's a when. And so I have some Texas, but I am very careful about the Texas that I do, because you see these markets where tons of people are moving there. Everybody thinks it's rosy. I think if you look on things, when you're looking at things that might be a longer hold, that might be a 10 to 15 year hold, I have a lot more trepidation of those things. I'll do 3 to 5 year holds on places in Texas or Arizona, but I wouldn't do a 15 or 20 year hold. I'd be terrified of where things might be at that point in time.
Yeah. More granular, what I got when you summarized the report to me was that it is, as you mentioned, the heat and the lack of water first before the water rising. And from an economic perspective, it's going to be different on a state by state basis because it's the insurance. Like what happens when a neighborhood stops being insurable?
Yeah, and FEMA just completely changed the way they do flood insurance. So they used to kind of average things out a lot amongst more people, and then they decided to more or less stop doing that. So you're seeing people on the coasts, particularly in Florida, whose insurance will go up by the maximum FEMA allowable percentage, which is like 18% for like a decade or a decade and a half. They'll go from paying, $1,500 or $2,000 a year to paying $20,000 or $25,000 a year. And that coupled with storms that can keep increasing, and the extreme storm, it keeps increasing in magnitude. I just think there's a lot of places where people are like, oh, this is the best place to be right now. I mean, Miami is another perfect example. Everyone's moving to Miami. When big storms come in, the streets flood that weren't flooding 10, 15 years ago, right? Like and there's going to be the superstorm, the storm of the century. Like we're going to have a storm of the century every 10 years. Before long enough, and I think people are going to start to think twice about some of those places, and you don't want to be left holding the real estate bag when that happens. You don't want to be owning the house that you bought at the top of the market when enough people wake up to the fact of like, oh, this might not be a great place to live in 20 years.
I also think no income state housing or states such as Texas and specifically Florida, because it's so crypto friendly, but just being a no income state in general, I think those markets are more correlated to crypto right now. Right, it's the work remote, trade, short-term gains. Let's move to a tax-efficient state. Miami is the capital of crypto in the country.
Well, especially because Miami's proximity to Puerto Rico, and because of the crazy tax, like basically loophole of Puerto Rico. Like if you live in Puerto Rico for 51% of your time and you live in Miami for 49% of your time, you pay like almost no taxes. As long as you check the other couple boxes of like hiring a couple people and having enough like investment in there, which is crazy. So, and then Florida, I mean, no income tax states have certainly made a big bet on getting lots and lots of people to move there, juicing the rest of the economy. And I think that like, I don't know, we'll see what that shakes out.
Well, we're going down the rabbit hole, and I think that we could continue doing this for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah, we could probably.
This happens often, but I want to thank Aaron. Thank you for joining us today. This was super interesting. And,
thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Yeah,
thank you.
See you next week.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.